To call this meeting of the Clay County Commission to order. Since we are not taking any votes, there's no reason for a roll call or some of the other things that we usually have during these meetings. So with that, we will go right into our one item, which is, well, two items. One is discussion, the other is adjourn. So we will go ahead and get into our discussion items, which is the proposed 2025 Sheriff and Road and Bridge Fund budget. That would be the administrator. Please proceed.
And just a clarification, so today is the Law Enforcement Fund and the Park Fund.
Very good, thank you.
And so again, a very informal workshop. I think we have left your microphones live, and so please, I can see if you have a green light, so please feel free to stop me and ask questions. Again, I remind commissioners, we have coffee and water available to you at any time.
Could you, just a bit more, please. Thank
Sorry,
you.
okay. So we're just going to dive right in. This is our second workshop for the proposed 2025 budget. And as I said, we're going to talk about law enforcement and the park fund. And so today with Law Enforcement Fund, we'll do a fund overview. We'll talk about some of the miscellaneous law enforcement funds that are also available to the Sheriff's Office. We'll hit some budget highlights and addition, goals, and accomplishments. And then we'll follow the same format for the Park Fund. My guess is we'll do a break in between there. We'll do a fund overview, but we'll also talk about the Park Capital Use Tax Fund and do an overview of that and do some budget highlights, additions, accomplishments for this year, and goals for next year. And then we'll also at the end review the budget calendar for the remaining workshops that we have and the tentative date for the public hearing and the adoption. And so with that, I'm going to just jump right into the Sheriff's Office and talk about the Law Enforcement Fund. But first, what you have on this slide is an organizational chart of the Sheriff's Office. It should be noted that there are 225 full-time employees in the Sheriff's Office, and that represents 40% of the county workforce is within the Sheriff's Office. As we look at the Law Enforcement Fund and we look at the proposed revenues, for 2025 in the proposed budget, it's slightly less than $31 million, $30,955,737. So this chart reflects to you where those sources come from. So the pie chart on the left will give you a visual. As you can see, the law enforcement sales tax that the citizens renewed several years ago, it's a 1/8 cent sales tax. It represents 19% of the revenue proposed in next year's budget. We have proposed for you a dedicated direct general sales tax that equates to 29% of the revenue. And then in the general fund, and we talked about this last week during the general fund, is a transfer on an as-need basis. As the way it's programmed right now, that represents 41% of the revenues. The Sheriff's Office also gets prisoner boarding income. There are some grants in there. Now, this particular fund does not include the JAG grant. That's later on in the capital fund. But 6% of their revenue comes from some of their other grants, and then we have some miscellaneous income. Now, the chart on the right is sort of, if you're into actual numbers, we will show for you the major revenues. We'll show you the actuals for 21, 22, and 23. You'll see our 24 estimated revenues, and then what we're proposing in 2025 by those particular categories, where it's the law enforcement sales tax, the general sales tax, a direct allocation, or the general fund transfer, and then revenue that they've received from the prisoner boarding that they receive from other agencies. So a couple things I'd like to highlight on this particular slide for you, just as an FYI, especially in the law enforcement sales tax, our estimate for 2024, if you had an opportunity to read the most recent report from our treasurer, our sales tax is up this year, and so we anticipate that the actual revenue for 2024 for law enforcement is going to be slightly higher than this. It's probably going to be closer to about, I want to say 6.2, 6.4. So what that means is that income increases, then the general fund transfer as needed comes down. So that's just a note there. But again, we put the budget together so early to prepare these numbers that we don't really have November, December numbers when we do that. So it's a couple things I wanted to highlight there for you. And I think right now the treasurer's report said year-to-date law enforcement is $6.2 million. Any questions on any of those? Then I'm, yes, and I thought there were, could you hit your microphone, please?
Yeah, we'll do the old microphone. I just noted on here, and I appreciate the explanation on the sales tax pieces, but I did notice a proposed drop in prisoner boarding related income by a couple $100,000. I was just sort of curious as to if that was really more of a placeholder number or if we actually expected less activity on that.
And I don't want to speak for the sheriff, and I'm sure he'd be happy to answer that on his expectations. But again, we take a conservative approach when it comes to that. And if you look at prisoner boarding, the actuals, you see it fluctuates substantially, right? In 2022, it was really low, and there was a reason for that. So some of the reimbursements that we submitted were delayed, and so we got those funds in 2023, which is why 23 jumped up. Now 24, we're estimating to be about the same, but it could be, again, timing issues that, on when we actually bill and when we actually get the receipts of funds. As you know, we've had some work done in the detention facility over the last couple of years, and that certainly impacted availability of space, but that has all been completed. So I think we just kind of took a conservative approach. And I also know, I believe the sheriff is also in discussions with the other agencies about what that fee is going to be.
Gotcha.
And so based on that, some of the agencies were saying they may send their individuals to other detention facilities. So we took a conservative approach on that.
Well, and then I guess, as you had mentioned, with a couple of these years, there may be a lag in this. So
Right.
depending on how those negotiations end, that number could still end up being higher because of the lag of payment whenever that's done.
And I might
Is that fair to say?
Correct.
chime in too on this one. This one's interesting. It's Sheriff can correct me if I'm wrong. It's the cost from the state of Missouri. It's for boarding state prisoners essentially.
Right.
So this isn't the municipalities
Okay.
Right.
line. This is
Right.
But yeah, to the administrator's point, we do a conservative budget estimate, but it is an increase from prior years. So it's just being cautious.
Okay.
Yeah.
Well, appreciate the explanation.
And if the money comes in, we'll certainly book that.
By the way, I neglected to mention at the beginning of the meeting, Commissioners, that like the last meeting, these are relatively informal. It is not necessary to seek recognition from the chair. Please just get the attention of whoever is at the podium. I don't see a role for the chair except maybe to sort of play traffic cop if necessary, but that usually doesn't come up. So with that, I just want to make sure everybody was aware of how we would be going forward on these. Thank you.
I have a question the sheriff probably can answer. Two things as I went through my budget book, because I have no other life. I was looking at, one of the things that I noticed jumped out at me was the revised budget for travel expense of $9,000. Give me an idea what that constitutes.
So whenever we do training outside of the KC metro area, obviously there's travel expenses that go along with that.
Okay.
So before we used to count it as a part of our training budget, but what we're doing now is just separating it so we can get a better idea of how much travel we're spending.
Okay, no, that makes perfect sense. Okay, and the other one was, what are miscellaneous salaries? That's 6,500.
Commissioner, if I could clarify just to help the conversation, is this is it in the department 556 or what is the department when you're?
It is, just a minute. Benefits and insurances.
Great. So yes.
It is 680.
So yes, Commissioner, that is, county made a decision to basically with the sheriff's retirement system, because as we know, the courts threw out that fee that funded the sheriff's retirement system. So the county basically funds that payroll deduction
Right.
for the system.
And it's very similar. We have the same situation with the prosecutors.
Okay.
And the county also funds the retirement for the prosecutor. The elected prosecutor and sheriff are not eligible to be in some of the
Right.
retirement systems that other employees are in. So they have a separate one. And so because it wasn't funded, and I think as the auditor mentioned, that change happened, I think, last year. And the commission did decide to, for the very first time this year, cover those costs of the sheriff's retirement fund, similar to what we do with the
Oh, okay.
prosecutors.
I remember that now, yeah.
Okay.
Okay.
Okay, great segue into expenditures. So this slide shows you the proposed expenditures for the law enforcement fund in the amount of $30,955,737. The pie chart on the left will show you by our 4 categories, how are those dollars being spent? Well, 78% of the law enforcement budget is in personnel. We can't do what we do and have individuals on the street and individuals in the detention center and individuals in the 911, well, they're not in this one, but we'll talk about that in a minute. But we can't do what we do for law enforcement without our personnel. So it is our largest expense area, followed by contractual and then commodities and a little bit in capital. The majority of the capital for the sheriff's office comes out of Fund 300, which is the general capital use tax fund, and we'll talk about that in a little bit. And so what the chart on the right shows you, again, by those categories, if you're a person who likes to see numbers, we provided to you the actuals for 21, 22, and 23, what we're estimating 24 is going to come in at, and then our proposed 2025 budget. So this is not budget to budget on this slide. This is budget to actuals or to estimate for this year. And again, I remind you, in 2025, we fully fund 100% every day of the year, every position in the law enforcement fund, plus fully funding their benefits. So it's one of the reasons you see the jump in personnel costs. The other aspect that is in the personnel category is individuals in the sheriff's office are also proposed to get the 5% salary adjustment, with the exception of our detention officers, because of trying to get closer to market. It is an area that we have significant vacancies in, that we're proposing that each detention position go up $7,000, which is greater than the 5%. Contractual is gone up a little. A part of that, and I'm sure the sheriff can talk a little bit, number one is food costs have gone up. You saw it in the juvenile detention budget. You're going to see it in the law enforcement budget. We've also expanded when it comes to medical costs in the detention center. Those are done contractually. And then commodities are going up, and they're certainly reflected of just inflationary issues. And then there's just a little bit of small capital in this particular budget. I know that law enforcement, public safety is a priority of the commission. And so what this chart does is show you historically, budget to budget, what has been budgeted for the law enforcement fund since 2020, basically from COVID to the proposed 2025. And so you can see that 24 budget compared to the 25 proposed is a 10% increase. But if we look at the budget in 2020 through 2025, that's a 51% increase that we've committed resources to our law enforcement. But I want to spend a little bit of time talking about the law enforcement budget in a little bit different perspective. As the commission is aware, the voters approved the 911 device fee, dedicated revenue to the 911 fund. That covers in 911 our MARC expenses, but we also moved our dispatchers, their wages and their benefits and their operating costs, their training costs and those such things to the 911 fund. So I kind of want to walk you through this chart so there's a clear understanding and full transparency of what's being funded and how do we compare budget to budget. So if you look at the chart, the first column is the 24 approved budget by the 4 categories with a total of $28.2 million. And you see the 25 budget that is proposed, and then you see the increase in personnel is 1.5, increase in contractual, increase in commodities, and so there's an increase in the budget to budget of $2.7 million, which is a 10% increase. But if we really want to compare apples to apples, because the 2025 budget does not have any costs in for dispatchers, their wages or their benefits or their operating costs, because that's been moved to the 911 fund beginning in 2025. So if we look at the 2024 budget of 28.2 million, and we basically take out the wages and benefits in 24 for the dispatchers and their operating, which is about $809,000, then you get an adjusted budget in 2024 of 27.4 million. And if you compare that budget to the proposed 2025 budget of 30.9, you'll see that there is an increase in the proposed budget to adjusted budget of 3.5 million, or a 13% increase. I certainly wanted to spend some time going through this because I think sometimes we've seen it and governments have done it is, well, you give us a new revenue stream and we're going to use that and we're going to then not fund what we've done in the past. So I wanted it to be clear that certainly the commitment to the law enforcement fund is there and has always been there and will continue. And so just to have full transparency of what that budget looks like if you start comparing. Any questions on that? Okay. In addition to the law enforcement fund that we've just talked about and all its revenue sources, there are some other funds that are available to the sheriff. Some of these are simply coming from, by state statute, coming out of court, and different operating funds that are available to the sheriff, whether it's for the K-9 fund or, the work release program, or, and again, we have the dispatchers and 911. So we always kind of take a look at all of those things. And so that is an additional almost $7 million, $6.7 million from all these other funds, including the capital use tax fund to fund capital for the sheriff's office. So that brings the total for law enforcement in next year's budget of $37.7 million, with, again, the majority of that, 82%, is from the law enforcement fund, and almost 11% comes from the capital use tax fund. Now, that capital use tax fund, that amount totals about $4 million, a little over $4 million. And of that $4 million, 2.5 of it is the federal grant that the sheriff's office is receiving. And as we talked about last week when we approved the contracts for the LRC, part of that is going to be used for the Law Enforcement Resource Center, but the other part of it is capital equipment, capital projects that the sheriff has planned. The pie chart on the right kind of gives you a breakdown of the total $37.7 million available for law enforcement. How are we spending those dollars? So 66% of it is going to personnel, and 15% of it is going to contractual, and then you see 14 is in capital, which could be as equipment or things in the buildings, and 5% is for the commodities. And so with that, that's kind of the numbers. I'm going to turn it over to Sheriff Aiken. He's going to talk about the accomplishments for this year, the goals for next year, and then any highlights of the budget, and then certainly I'm available to any questions that you all may have.
Thank you, Diana. Okay, so for safety and well-being, we, for the first time, have been able to implement and issue body-worn cameras to our detention officers and deputies in the jail. That was one area that we had a massive gap, because a lot of stuff happens in the jail, but we were never able to record the incident up front. Now we have the camera systems and the boards and stuff like that. We have our control center operators, but that's always from afar, and you can't hear as well as see any incident that's going down where detention officers and deputies have to take action in that moment. So we were able to implement this, and now our detention officers and deputies wear it. So it's a safety factor for not only our employees, but also for the inmates. We also implemented a wellness and nutrition program. This is actually being talked about across the country, because everyone knows through studies, through surveys, that law enforcement needs something more than just the traditional law enforcement training. And when we talk about health and wellness, we're talking about, obesity, really, and the factors, the problems that come with it. So we implemented a wellness and nutrition program and hired someone who is a fitness coach and nutrition coach. In the almost 5 months that we have employed our coach, we have had 20 employees participate in the program that resulted in probably nearing 350 plus pounds lost. And that's not just for the employees that are participating in the program. He also does kind of like a virtual coaching as well. And so with employees who don't necessarily feel comfortable in the gym or working out with our coach, they ask for guidance. And those employees have lost a tremendous amount of weight as well. We don't know the total amount because they want to remain a little private with their successes, which I respect, but at the same time, the goal is for them to be healthier, and they're achieving that. It worked so well that we've actually expanded it to county employees who are interested. So we worked with Diana and her team, and we have county employees that are now participating in the wellness program. So that was a huge hit. In fact, a short story, I was in Boston for the International Association of Chiefs of Police conference, and a buddy of mine from Minnesota was walking down the street, and we happened to cross paths. And he started talking about the things that we were doing at the Clay County Sheriff's Office in Clay County, and this is one of the programs that he was telling his group. So they're watching from afar. As far as our employer of choice category, we finally implemented our sabbatical program. Now I have to caveat this with, when they first brought it to my attention, my staff, I responded with not no, but heck no, because we're a public entity, not a private entity. And so we started looking at this in more detail and looking at the successes other agencies across the country have been having with this type of program. So what we finally ended up with is a 3-week program where we give our employees a sabbatical. Now they have to meet certain requirements, certain parameters. They have to be employed with us at least 5 years or increments of 5 years before they participate. But we remove anything work-related from them, with the exception of their badge and their firearm. So we take their radio away, we take their equipment away, their car away, we shut their email down, and we want them to completely disconnect from the sheriff's office to basically reset. But what we did was we partnered with a clinician who's doing a pre and post study. And so they have to be interviewed before they enter the sabbatical program, and then once they're done with it, they get interviewed again for post. And so what we're hoping to achieve is whether or not this program is working, and can we show data that supports that. Went so far as to say that if they participate in this program after they're done with their interview, then they can take 2 additional weeks off on their dime. And we've had, I believe, 6 employees participate so far, and one of the requirements when they come back is they have to have a conversation with me. And I get to find out really like what's happening. And I will tell you, in a couple instances, I actually had to fight tears back, because our employees, they come to work day in and day out. They're quite frankly overworked because of our staffing situation. And I will share this story that one of our employees was at home, and he realized that his kids kept passing by him and asking mom for everything. And he was like, am I chopped liver? I'm sitting right here. Why can't you ask me? And he startled them because it was something that really bothered him. And they just looked at him and said, Dad, we're sorry, we forgot you were here. You're never here. And so that was an epiphany for him. He was like, I really need to restructure my life and place my family before the job. And that's something that I tell our employees. If you can't be a cop tomorrow, what's going to happen to the sheriff's office? It's going to keep on sheriffing, with or without us. I mean, that's just the nature of the environment in the industry that we work in. So they have really benefited from this program, and we're hoping that at least when the clinician gets enough personnel to go through this, that we'll have enough data to actually start analyzing it and then coming up with results that we can share not only with the commissioners, but with the metro-wide as well as state and national. I'm on the Community Policing Committee with the International Association of Chiefs of Police, and I brought this program up, and almost every member in attendance came up to me afterward and said, we want to know the results of your program, because this is the first time that they have heard of that we're actually collecting data from it and not just giving people time off.
So how long, you have an officer that comes to you wants to participate. So how long is the first portion of the program? How long are they off where they have nothing, no involvement in anything?
3 weeks.
Wow,
Yes.
great.
Yeah, and they're in the private sector, the sabbaticals, as you may very well know, for let's say universities, can be a year long, or some companies, some organizations, they can do 2 weeks. And so we landed at 3 based off of what we have seen other agencies doing. And so we came up with the 3 weeks with the potential of doing 2 additional weeks. Now, I will say that one of my employees came back after 3 weeks and was just like, hey, thanks for the time off. And I go, okay, well, tell me, like, how did you reflect? Well, I just took some time off. And so we had a conversation, and at the end of the conversation, he goes, Sheriff, if you're okay with it, I'd really like to take my 2 other weeks now. Because one of the things that he said was, we have so many projects happening at the sheriff's office, and they're gonna happen with or without me, or without me, if I don't come back to work. And I was like, then you're missing the point of the sabbatical.
Yeah.
This stuff will happen without you, and we will be okay. You invest so much of your time and energy into the sheriff's office that I wanna make sure that you're okay, because when you're not okay, then we lose.
That's
We lose. So, so far it's been pretty successful. Now, I will say that when we first rolled it out, not one employee took advantage of it. And the reason why, as we learned, was because our employees were, they were concerned that they weren't going to be able to work off duty. A lot of our employees rely on off duty to supplement their income. And they said, if you're taking everything away from me and I can't work off duty, then forget that. Well, that's a problem. And so we finally said, okay, here's the deal. You still can't work off duty, but this is how we're going to lay it out. And slowly, people have been participating, and the ones that have come back and benefited from it, which is 100% so far, they've gone out and they've started championing this sabbatical program with other employees, and now they're starting to submit their applications. It is an application process. There are parameters that have to be met, and there are some agreements that have to be agreed to. So it's not just, hey, you're gonna get 3 weeks off. No, it's gonna be, you're a part of this data collection program that's called a sabbatical program. And so far, 100% has been successful.
What does that do to your staffing?
It raises morale first and foremost. And if you've ever heard one
No,
of
I
my...
mean, how do you, in an environment where, and I think it's a phenomenal program. That's great. But where you're a little bit short on women, then how does that affect your staff as far as, does this guy have to work a little bit overtime or, something of that nature?
That's a great question. Yes. The simple answer is yes. We're always short. But we can't penalize the current employees
Right.
because of that in order to allow them 3 to 5 weeks, and my hope is 5 weeks, to reset and then come back.
Yeah.
They're in a much better headspace, and I'm imagining that we're probably going to see less sick leave usage. We're going to see less last minute, hey, I need, Friday off, and then, building that pattern of every Friday for the last 4 months you've been calling off, or Friday and Monday. There are patterns that have arisen because of just the fact that we're short-staffed. So, yeah, it causes a little bit of overtime or a little bit of shift work from employees from one area to another if we have that capability. But it's a matter of investing in our employees so that they stay with us and not leave because they're so overworked.
Exactly. Okay, thank you.
Okay, and then salary adjustment for commission personnel was the next one. This year was supposed to be the first year that Clay County Sheriff's Office was supposed to be competitive with the rest of the market in the KC metro area. And then when we increased our salaries to 55 starting and adjusted everything to the right on a scale, Kansas City Police Department, Independence, Riverside, everyone was like, oh, we can't have that. So they increased up to $10,000 more than what we were paying. But I will say, I'm proud to say that I think we've only lost 2 personnel from them increasing their salaries, but it wasn't because of their salaries. And that's what we were concerned with. They're gonna increase their salaries, we're gonna lose people to that. No, it was one person moving closer to home, and the increased salary allowed them to move closer to home. And then the other one, it's more of a legacy for them, because his father was in the Kansas City Police Department, his grandfather was with the Kansas City Police Department, and so he felt like he wanted to carry on that legacy, which, all right, that's great, but we're talking less than 5. So that's pretty awesome. But, thanks for the continued support in that area, because, you can increase the salaries all you want, but these agencies, some of these agencies that have increased, what they haven't changed is culture. And I'm not talking down about them, but there's a reason why they continue to have vacancies, even at the rates that they're increasing their salaries to. So that speaks volumes.
Well, and I might add to that though, Sheriff, I think at least in the case of Kansas City, part of their issue was their attrition rate. And by raising, those folks that could have retired out now have reason to stay a couple of extra years, and then their intention is to go.
Yeah.
Because they will top out at that point. So I think to that last point, it's those intangibles, whether it's things like the sabbatical program you mentioned or other things. I think, to your point, we do that, you do that very, very well. And I think that those raises that are, I think, mainly there to keep those who can retire from leaving, that will play out over a couple of years, and then they're kind of right back where they were, in my opinion. But I think salary is crucially important, but these other intangibles are just as important. And so I just want to encourage you to continue to think in that direction, because it is clearly getting results, so at least as far as manpower is concerned. So I just want to throw that in there for you.
Awesome, thank you.
I got a question for you, Sheriff. I was going to ask this later, but since we're on the topic of salaries. So a couple years ago, we saw a big need with the Sheriff's Department, particularly the sworn personnel, because of you're at the very bottom in the region. We made some pretty big adjustments the last couple of years, and I think got you somewhat competitive. But to me, that's always, we're always chasing that. 'Cause like you said, Kansas City made a big increase, and some people followed that. There's always going to be those outliers. There's always going to be someone who's maybe way above, or I'm not so concerned about that. But do you know, and maybe you haven't looked recently, but and I don't need specifics, but as far as our salary range now and the salary for our deputies, are we still in the competitive range? Are we still in the ballpark? Or are we falling too far behind again? Or where are we at with that?
I don't know the numbers off the top of my head, but when I hear officers in other agencies topping out over $100,000 a year, and we're barely meeting 70-ish for our deputies, I'm going to say that we're back at the bottom. But on that note, though, I want to say that I'm super excited to hear that the results from the compensation study that we have embarked on earlier this year, and to see what's happening with that. Because like what Commissioner Wagner said, absolutely, it's going to play out in a couple of years, and then they're going to be back at the same problem or the same issue that they have. Whereas we have, over the last 4 years, according to the numbers, you can really see how we've increased the salaries of our deputies. We're not going to play that out. We're continuing to move forward, and our employees see that. And I think that's one of the things that they're holding on to, is hope, because we do have a supportive commission, and we don't have to worry about everyone retiring at the last minute. In fact, I'm trying to get people to retire. And that's only because they've served their county and our communities for a long time, and they deserve retirement. But they love their jobs so much, and they continue to stay, and they're still productive. I mean, that's great. But we have hope that we're continuing to increase. But I think the short answer is, I think we're back at the bottom again.
Okay, well, I'm really looking forward to the salary study, actually. I think I'm really glad we did that, and I think it's going to be really helpful for all of our employees. So, okay, thank you.
Okay, man, I'm super excited to say that we are 99.9% complete for the detention control system upgrade. As you recall from last year and this year, the problems that we ran into with the renovation, we are finally done. I'm going to leave the E off because when we did the renovation, there were some vulnerabilities, some issues, just because of the facility being built 40 years ago, and they had different standards that back then. So we've been working with facilities management in trying to come up with solutions that were outside of the scope of the project, but nonetheless are still issues with the facility. And I'm pretty sure that we're getting close to not only, I think we pretty much identified the solutions. We just have to enact them and make us done. And just be done with that. So I'm pretty excited about that. And then we upgraded the security for the courthouse. We put bullet resist. I think everyone knows about it. I think we talked about it. It's one of those things that we don't want the public to know, but at the same time, we want them to know because our public are in the courthouse. So we put bullet-resistant film on the windows in case there's an active shooter threat external. We can lock down, and the deputies have the capability now to lock the doors automatically through devices that have been installed. So big security project upgrade completion there. So moving into 25. So, calcium scores. Are you familiar with calcium scores? If you're over 40 years old, I suggest going to the Liberty Hospital or your hospital of choice, pay $50 and have your calcium score checked. We've learned over the years that that for whatever reason, our bodies have a tendency to build up calcium within our hearts and everything that's surrounding the cardiopulmonary system. I don't fully understand it. I'm not that kind of doctor, but it makes sense to me as far as going to get checked out. As an example, I have heart disease history in both sides of my family, and I was pretty nervous to go get my calcium score checked. So I went and had it checked. My score is 0. Now, anything over 500, as an example, you're probably going to have some type of procedure, and they tell you that when you go there. My father and I went at the same time, and his score came back 2,049. He had no idea. And so, we've taken steps from that point. But it's something that has to do with stress. Stress, when you're constantly involved in stress, and eating habits and lifestyle. So what we've done was we've learned from that, and then from information that we're learning from different conferences as well, that there's another screening that we can take, and it's called the PLA2. And that goes a little bit deeper. Well, that's an $800 out of your pocket versus a $50 pocket, roughly. So we went to the county and working with HR and risk management and the rest of the team, we're trying to figure out a way to have our insurance cover that. And this isn't new. For example, the Liberty Fire Department, they do it. And I think the Liberty Police Department or the city is trying to expand that to them. But that's been mandatory for the fire department. And if it's good enough for the fire department, then it should be good for all public safety services, right? So we're working with the county, and we're hoping to be able to, at some point, include that so it's not an out-of-pocket expense. 2 years ago, I think it's been 2 years ago now, the state passed the Officer Bill of Rights. And in there was included being checked on every year. Now, checked on is a little mini psyche valve, just really to go see a clinician and to say, hey, is everything okay? How are you doing? Because if you look at the Officer Down Memorial page, the results are clear. Suicide is almost twice as much as officers killed in the line of duty. Well, going back to the health and well-being, this is one of those well-beings and wellnesses that we want to make sure. The state just enacted a statute to say, hey, now you have to do it. But it was unfunded, so we had to come up with a creative way to say, how are we going to make this happen? There are agencies out there that say it's unfunded, we don't have the money, we're not going to do it. We'll just let it play out. Well, we're not that kind of agency. So what we did was we partnered with a psychological clinical organization, and they're doing it for us at a reduced to no cost. And they also accept our insurance. So we're able to not only have them checked, but then if they want to continue services with them, they have the ability to continue. And it's not just for them, because a lot of times, whatever one of our deputies or our employees, and we've extended this to beyond the requirement of deputies, we've extended this to all of our employees. And what we're finding is it's not the work per se, it's the issues that they're experiencing at home. There's no proverbial light switch that I get to switch leaving from home to come to work to forget everything at home so that way it doesn't impact the way I conduct my job. And vice versa. I can't flip it off when I leave work and not take it home with me. So that was a big win for the Clay County Sheriff's Office as well. And we partnered up with them, and this, in 25, we will start those checks. Now, we have to go through at least 150 because we have sworn, and that's required by statute, but we're opening it up to our employees as well. So 225-ish people will be going through this.
Before you go on, Sheriff, I was just going to ask whether it's for this program that you're about to embark on, or even in the past program that you mentioned that you are doing. Are you getting
the participation or anticipating participation you want, are you thinking about or have used any sort of incentivizing to get that participation? And I only ask that because I know KCPD has done some of that well-being incentive in the past, and I'm sure others has. I'm sure you probably did. And so I was just sort of curious if you have or are contemplating some sort of incentivizing for that.
So for this particular statutory requirement, the incentive is we pay you overtime if you've already worked there. Or if it's on duty, we will send you while you're on duty. So it's not on their own time. But as far as incentivizing wellness, health and wellness, physical health and wellness, and those different categories, we haven't had to incentivize it. I think in the last 4 years, to include myself going into a voluntary inpatient program where I joked that I was strong-armed in participating in that program by my friend who was the clinical director, and because she knows my history, and I was there for her when she lost her son to a murder, and she made me go through. And I tell you, it was quite the experience because we all think we're okay until something happens and it's been brought to our attention from the outside saying you're not okay. And so we've kind of broken through that stigma, that barrier, to the point where other agencies across the metro area are asking us, how did you do that? Can you write a letter of support for this program? Because we know that we can only experience so much trauma at a time. I mean, I think the statistics are 1 to 2 traumatic experiences for the average person in a lifetime. Law enforcement experiences that on multiple occasions every day at work. And so you can only bottle that stuff up so much. So with that breaking through the stigma, we've had more employees participate voluntarily, but we will still do it while they're on duty. Mm-hmm.
Just a couple comments. First, I'm a big fan of this kind of stuff, particularly for law enforcement, and for 2 reasons for law enforcement. Number one, the stress that's involved in law enforcement, and most people just will not understand that kind of stress that's involved unless you've done it. There's a lot of stress there which causes all sorts of problems, medically wise. But also, if I were to pick a group of people that are less likely to go to a doctor because they know everything already, it's going to be law enforcement.
Absolutely.
And there's so many things that are preventable, even if it's just a yearly checkup. When I was working, one of the things we did when I was in Newport Beach is they gave full body scans to every employee for free, which was huge. There's so much, everything that you're showing here was part of that process, the cardiac calcium and everything else. And it was really eye-opening what that showed, and so many people found things they didn't realize was going on that could be fixed. If they're addressed soon enough, and just like most cancers, when they're addressed soon enough, they can usually be taken care of. Before that, like was mentioned, we had in Long Beach, we had a wellness program where we'd have different things we'd have to achieve. Some of it was a blood test, and depending on what your calcium levels were, if you had a certain calcium level, the better your calcium level was, the more time off. So we gave, I think it was time off. It was banked time is what you got. So take time off whenever you wanted, up to, I forget, a couple of days, depending on how well you done the test. Everything from a mile run to stretching exercises to different things that they were tested, as well as blood work stuff. And so each time you went back, I think it's tested each year, the better you got, the more time off you got. Just a little incentive. And actually, more than the incentive, it got guys and girls to find out things that they didn't realize that they had going on in their bodies. Things that, like you talk about the cardiac calcium. Some people have no idea about that, and they're surprised. Sometimes, like I'm sure your father was, surprised to find out, 2,000, that's crazy.
Yeah.
But if you know that, you can address that. And quite frankly, these kinds of programs save lives of our employees sometimes. And I've seen it happen before in other agencies. So I'm a big fan of this. Things like the wellness program we did, there's something that you don't have to reinvent because they're out there as you know, they're all over the place. If there's something we want to do to incentivize that kind of stuff, there's programs out there you can take a look at and stuff. But I just want you to know that I'm a big proponent of this. And I think it's across the board, actually, particularly in law enforcement, but across the board for all employees. Because, like I said, a lot of people just don't go to the doctor anymore. Just don't want to. I feel fine. A lot of things you're going to feel fine until it's too late. And these preventive measures, I think, are tremendous. So.
You know, on
thank
that note, in the last year and a half, we've had two tragic incidents happen. And one was where a firefighter was taking a swim retest who had a cardiac event and died in the swimming pool. I think that's still fresh in our memory, but even before that, the Liberty Fire Department experienced a full scan of one of their firefighters, and they discovered in one particular gentleman that he had stage 4 pancreatic cancer, and he passed away roughly 3 weeks later. But they found it in that scan. Now, pancreatic cancer is one of the most aggressive cancers that is out there, and from the time when he was scanned the year before to this time, that happened. And so we can't always catch everything, but it's still such a valuable thing that we can do. And I think that's why we don't necessarily have to incentivize it, because our employees are now looking forward to it. Every time we bring up a new idea, they're like, oh my gosh, if that's gonna make me better, not just as an employee, but better father, mother, brother, sister, whatever the case may be, they're on 100%. And, but it does cost money. I mean, I feel like every time I'm talking, I'm asking for money, but it's for our employees, and with the hopes that we can expand it, in your words, to the rest of the county employees, because it is important. I mean, I'm not gonna say that our job isn't inherently dangerous, but at the same time, think about our county employees who are having to deal with the public during tax season and some of the threats that they've had made to them. So I think they would benefit just as much as us.
That really brings it all home heavily. Long years ago, when my husband was on the police department, they had nothing like this. And he was in probably the most crime-ridden area, was his area. And he'd come home after something really bad happened, and he didn't want to talk. He just wanted to, I'll talk about it later or something. And there was a lot of withdrawn time, stress and all of that. That all plays into it. Like you said, cancer is biggest cause is stress, and it's going to get you. And who has more stress than, your people? But I think it's the same way for all of our employees. I do agree. I'd really like to check into that possibility that we do that for everyone. Because, I mean, not like this is a horribly stressful job. I make it that way. It's my own fault. But a lot of people do that, stress over the job and all that. So it would be wonderful if we could do that for everybody. But I'm glad that you've got that going, because it's invaluable, really is.
Thank you.
I'm sorry, I do have to jump on that point, because as we've talked about our own health insurance and the ability to talk about wellness as a part of that, there's a dollars and cents to us as well. And I invite a comment if you want to make one.
Well, absolutely. And so we do have a wellness program on a countywide basis.
Right.
And again, I would remind the commissioners that one of the first things we implemented this year was on-site counseling.
Right.
Because we do believe that wellness, there's 5 pillars to wellness. There is social, there's financial, there's physical, and there is mental. And so having that here on site twice a month, where employees can go while they're working and not have to use their personal time. But again, there's still a stigma with regard to that. But it is building, and our counselor is seeing individuals. And so we do believe that's important. We also do a lot when it comes to educating employees. I'm a data person. A lot of things are driven by data. So we do look at the health insurance and say, what type of claims are we seeing, right? What are our largest prescriptions, right? Is it high blood pressure? Is it diabetes? Those kind of things. And so we are trying to focus on those to educate to how to get employees healthier. I agree with this particular testing program. We've got a lot of employees. Again, the simpler one is $50, and we encourage employees to go do that. We also, depending on which health plan our employees are in, the county contributes to a health savings account. And so that's an eligible expense that they could take that $50 out of those funds. And so, again, a lot of it we know is about education, and it's also about making it convenient. We just had, and I think Director Callahan talked about it when she was here under the general fund and talked a little bit about the wellness program. And this year, we typically in the past had a health and safety fair. This year, it was strictly a health fair. And so we've looked at things. We have brought in dermatologists to give, skin cancer. We brought in a podiatrist because, especially with our field personnel and our deputies, wearing the proper shoes and making sure your feet are in good shape has an impact on your entire body. So there are lots of things that we are also trying and make available to our employees. One of the challenges from a county is we have employees all over the county. And so how do you find that site to make it convenient for employees to come from Smithville? So we're continuing to evolve. We do surveys with our employees of every event that we have to say, tell us about it. Was it worthwhile? Is it something you'd like to see again? Is there something you'd like to see we're not doing? Is it convenient? If you didn't participate, why not?
Right.
And so it is, we're continuing to build upon that.
Well, and I would note, as I think Kim told us a couple weeks ago, when we had that health fair, about half of our employees, if I recall correctly, participated and came to that.
It was about 100, so it was
Yeah.
a small amount.
It was about when-
But,
yeah,
but still, in my view, a significant percentage.
Yeah.
And I think, the motivation may be a little bit different depending on what part of the organization you're in, but, a healthier work population that are not big users of the system creates, in my book, that cost containment on insurance over time. And so however we can add things, however and I'd love to see what the data will say by next year as far as whether or not we may need to consider some sort of further incentive for folks to participate.
Yeah.
But I think that's all there. Yeah.
And there are all sorts of incentive programs out there that are
Yeah.
structured. You have to be very careful with those programs on how they're structured. In a county, you can't give bonus, but there are ways to structure it and
Yeah.
but you have to make sure it's available to every employee,
Yeah.
depending on their circumstances, to get points. So there's lots and lots of different ways to structure it. I think, again, it is worthwhile. I'm a firm believer in wellness for our employees.
Yeah.
And I'd like to see us expand, right? In our health program, we'll do a blood draw, but it's just like the little fingerprint versus, doing more blood work so they can do a more in-depth program. And to the sheriff's example, I can talk about a prior location where I was, and we did the more extensive blood draw and found an individual that had PSAs were up and actually discovered cancer right off the bat. And, we'd say it, there are many of our employees that never go to the doctor, even though an annual physical is covered at 100%, because I'm not going to take time off, or I'm not going to do this, whereas we can make it convenient and do those results for them and let them have a consultation. And then one of the biggest successes, and I think the sheriff talked about that too, one of the best ways is employees talking about the program themselves and selling it to their colleagues, saying, hey, you know what, I did the blood draw and I found this, and so, I had cancer. And it was, so those kind of things, as opposed to us sitting here and talking about it, because reality is, we all know that, right? If we improve our lifestyle, we improve our health. Right? Easier said than done. And so, but hearing the colleagues and having groups do it together, like our walking challenges and going through marathons and doing it as teams, it's always sometimes easier to go with a buddy. And so if you have that buddy at work, that can help you do that.
Yeah.
So again, I think it's a worthwhile program for many, many reasons.
Yeah, well, thank you, and I didn't mean to take us too far afield, but these are important things for our folks, and there's a dollars and cents reality for our taxpayers as well, so thank you.
I'd be remiss by not saying that Director Kim Callahan, every time she sends something out or somebody sends something out from her team, it resonates across the sheriff's office. And I'm pretty sure it happens the same across the county with all the employees. But every time a 5K or a walk is advertised, everyone's like, hey, we're going to do this, we're going to do this. And all of a sudden, everyone's talking about it. I don't know how many people actually show up, but I know some of our employees have showed up to the last couple of the events that have been put on. So that's pretty awesome. Great job, Kim. Okay, I think we're on the salary adjustments for detention officers. The administrator talked about that with the $7,000 increase. That's going to be huge for our detention officers. The hardest part about running a jail is no one wants to work in a jail. I've been in law enforcement for over almost 22 years now, and never once have I ever thought I'd be associated with a jail. It's really hard to hire people to work in a jail, and I think it's because it's really scary, it's unknown, so, with the increase in the salary and the marketing strategy that we have started on with highlighting, it's not as scary. Here's what you would do, and we're doing a better job with telling a better message, telling a better story. So we're hoping with that increase and everything else that we were doing, the vacancies that we currently have will be filled up. And instead of me asking for more personnel, because we're short-staffed, but as the administrator and I were talking about, can we make that a future year problem? Let's get the vacancies filled up. And I was like, that was a great idea. So, everything that we've been doing for the last 4 years have made us or put us in a better place. And hopefully we can fill those vacancies up, and then I can come to you and ask for more positions. Right now, we just have to fill them up, and this is going to be extremely helpful. As far as the COLA increase for non-sworn personnel, that's always huge. Cost of living is going up. Everyone's feeling it in the pocketbook for the last year or so. And, with the cost of living increases, it helps alleviate that. So that definitely helps out the employees.
Sheriff, I just want to make a point here, because I want everybody to understand this. We talk about cost of living adjustments, and cost of living is usually a formula. It's tied in with inflation and consumer price index, that kind of stuff. But I want employees to know that we're not just doing a cost of living adjustment. We're going higher than that. I think what would the numbers be if we just did a straight based on, if you know off the top of your head?
I will say I don't know the current CPI, but
Your light's not
last
on.
I looked at it was like 3.2. It was around the 3%, and typically, when you do a cost of living adjustment, we historically will tie it to the CPI, and
Right.
you do like a 3 or 3.2%
Yeah.
increase. But what we're proposing is a 5%
Yeah.
increase. And again, as I said, when we talked about the general fund, one of the other things that we're doing for the employees is, number one, there's no increase for health insurance in 2025. Premiums are the same. And the commission has elected to help contribute towards dental insurance, which we've not done in the past. And so for those employees that had the voluntary dental and were contributing, they're going to see less in premiums for that. So they're not only getting a salary adjustment of 5%, but no health care increase, and also some assistance in reducing their premiums for dental insurance if they've been part of that. So we're trying to not keep up, but actually help our employees get a little ahead, because in the past we weren't able to allow our employees to keep up. So we're
And I think that's important for our employees to understand. So I don't even like the term COLA. I like raises, because a COLA is okay. We're going to keep it the bare minimum to go with inflation. A raise is you can get a little bit more than that. To me, it's important for two reasons. I think our employees are underpaid, so I don't want to just stay up with inflation. I think we should do better than that. But also with this class and comp study coming out, I think it's going to show that we're going to be a little bit behind in some things, and this kind of gives us a little bit of a catch up, so that we're not all of a sudden hit with a huge way. You're way behind, but that's a strategy. Go ahead.
No, you're absolutely correct. And so we have received some preliminary numbers back for the consultant, and the HR is scrubbing that data, because there's a lot of moving parts to this. People come and go, and people change positions, and so we're trying to get a handle on, based on the market data, where positions should be and where current employees in those positions would end up, and what do they need to be as an increase. So in addition to the salary adjustment for the detention officers and the 5% salary adjustment for all other personnel in the sheriff's office and across the organization, and what we've done for the prosecutor, in the 25 budget is basically a little over $1 million that's sitting there to help implement the results of the pay study. So what will happen is, because again, timing, unfortunately the study is not going to be ready to put in place in January. So come January, if the commission approves this budget, those increases that we're talking about today will go in place. 5% will go up, detention officers will do 7% and across the organization. And then from that point, we have the additional pot of money to put into place to kind of address those. So preliminary looking at it, I would say there are some positions that they're in the right range, right? The salary range based on the market. We have some positions that are going to take a significant adjustment to a new range. And so we're just kind of waiting to see all that. But I will say the preliminary numbers, and we're still scrubbing it, I believe we can do the consultant's recommendation with the $1 million that we have set aside. We might need a little bit more money, because again, that million is not only for the salary adjustments, but it also has to compensate for the benefits, right? So we raise wages, so FICA goes up for the county, SURF goes up for the account, the retirement systems go up. So we have to keep that into consideration in that $1 million. But based on preliminary numbers, I would say we're very, very close.
Good. That's a great plan you put together, too. I appreciate it. Thank you.
To your point, Commissioner Johnson, we make it very clear to our employees that the county doesn't even have to give a cost of living adjustment. And, you know, they're very attuned to other agencies and the COLAs that they're getting. Most agencies are only getting a 3%. And so when they hear that the commission is going to approve, soon to possibly approve a 5%, they know that is also a raise. And I always try to let them know, try not to let them forget where we were at just even 10 years ago.
You know, and I want to make it clear, this isn't just a commission, and I'm not looking for any accolades, you know, that, hey, I did this or we did this. This is good management is what this is, that we're able to do this. This is management that's really from our county administrator and our department head, you included, that you know, and other electeds, that have put us in a position that we can do this. We just say yes or no, pretty much. But it's really our management team that's been able to put us in this position. I think we have a great management team that manages our budget so well in this county, and I think that's why we're in the position. So I'm not looking for accolades from me or I mean, you guys might want some, so you can give them some, but I'm not looking for accolades on this. I think it's the management team, but I just want the employees to know that our management team is doing a great job and looking out for them. But thanks, Sheriff.
Just to be clear, I'm just happy when they remember my name, so it's okay.
Before I got involved with doing the sheriff's office budget for 8 years, it was always a fight with the budget team. And there was a whole lot of shady things going on. And, you know, I was optimistic with the new charter coming into this and working. And even from the first year to where we're at today, it has been night and day working with the budget team and everyone associated with it. So absolutely, I 100% concur with that.
Remember, go back years before that, when the sheriff got nothing, you know? And there was such contention between the sheriff and the commission. And I am gratified. Well, I don't always agree with everything that, you know, but my gosh, people can sit down and talk about it and come to a good understanding and agreement. And that wasn't that way before. So yeah,
The sheriff had to file a lawsuit to getting money
Yeah.
against the county.
Yeah.
And that
Anyway, I'm glad it's good now.
And I will say that case law has actually been used in other states. Sheriffs are actually calling me and asking me, hey, can you tell me more about Vescovo versus Clay County? All right, so moving on. Super excited about this next project, the Law Enforcement Resource Center. We're finally getting to a point which I was really disappointed I couldn't make it to the meeting last week because I had pneumonia, and it was something that's been going around. But I was able to watch it on YouTube, and we're finally here. You know, yeah, it's taken a while, but we're finally here. And you know, I'm not going to say it's going to be done in 2025. That would be amazing if it was, but I don't want to rush a project like this. Let's just go ahead and get it done right. We've gone this far. We don't need any issues with that moving forward. And then the commissary security upgrade. So we've renovated almost all the technology in the jail. And rather than me come to you and ask for $500 million to build a new jail, we're looking at the current facility that we have and to modify it and make it safer for not only our employees, but also for the inmates. And we're trying to come up with creative ways. And, you know, as you can imagine, our inmates have nowhere to go. Everything that they do is structured by us. And so when they go to get their commissary, if they feel like they didn't get what they got and they didn't get the right answer, let's just say the vendor just didn't have it in stock and they didn't see the fact that it was out of stock, then they get pretty upset. And there's nothing that protects our civilian staff from an inmate jumping over the counter and doing whatever they're going to do to them. So we're going to upgrade the security of the commissary room, and we're basically going to put a wire mesh in between the inmates and our staff. So that's one project. And there's some other projects that we're looking at that are more specifically geared towards strategic inmate management. And we're working with the National Institute of Corrections, and we're hoping that they'll have enough money in the budget next year, because as you all have been hearing about the next administration coming in, we don't know what's going to happen with different organizations. So if they're able to have the budget, they're going to send a team out to work with us over a period of 12 to 18 months. And they're going to identify areas that we can improve on in our jail, our current jail. And so we're basically reserving those construction projects for when they come in. And they're not secrets. Facilities management, Donna and our team, we've already been talking about it, and we're just putting it in the parking lot for now. But that's one of the projects. So that's the last thing I have. I know we've talked a lot as I've presented over the last 2 slides, but if you have any additional questions, I'd be happy to answer them.
I do have one, Sheriff, and I might as well just use the commissary discussion as a jumping off point for a request. I appreciate the notion of trying to avoid a big capital project down the road. That totally like that. Totally love to avoid that for our taxpayers and all of that. But I also want to be cognizant of being able to provide and have a facility that can go another 40 years. And so I know we've talked about studies in the past. You've brought up some of the conversation about analysis of the current facility. And I don't know if I'm asking for a discussion down the road in the next, maybe after they come. But I do want, only because I'm fighting the last battle I fought and was not successful, and now they're dealing with, I won't even get into it. Anyway, point is, while I'm here, I want to be confident that we have explored this issue to the fullest, that we have arrived at whatever the solution is collectively, that is that long-term solution, whether that is working with the facility we have, or if we have to bite the bullet, sorry for the pun, to put something out to the taxpayers. So I see our county administrator also has a comment to that effect. So go right
I would be happy to. As the commission may recall, in the 2024 budget, there is funding to do a space needs assessment, looking at issues now and into the future, not only for the detention facility, but also for the Rooney Courthouse, right? We know, based on population, we're eligible to get another judge at some point in time from the state. And simply,
Right.
you've heard from the judge, you hear from the sheriff, those are growing needs in both of those facilities. So on tomorrow night's agenda, on the consent agenda, is recommending to award those space needs studies to a vendor and get that project going, working with members of the courthouse and the sheriff's office to talk about how's it functioning now, what can we do in the interim, what is the long-term strategy. We're going to need more space. The question is, what does that look like? Can you add on to where we are?
Right.
Or do we need to maybe look at, completely different location? All of those things will be, it's a very comprehensive study that we're proposing. It will take a while, won't be done until sometime in 2025.
Yeah.
But part of that study will be, here are your options, here's what you need, here's some options to make that happen, and here's some potential costs, and here's some financial structure to how you might accommodate that. So all of that will be presented to the commission sometime in 2025.
Good. Well, I'm glad I could serve that up, so thank you very much.
The only thing I can add to that, Commissioner Johnson.
One question for you, Sheriff, and I asked the county prosecutor the same thing. His answer is no, and I certainly don't mean to make a political statement of this, but in all seriousness, the Trump administration coming in, he's made it very clear with his appointments and what he said is that they're going to be very active in pursuing the prosecution of what the law refers to as illegal aliens, particularly those criminal illegal aliens. And they're looking for support from local law enforcement, that kind of stuff in some instances. And I know that you've said publicly that, certainly you're there to support, enforce the laws that are on the books and supporting the other agencies, law enforcement agencies that are doing things legally. With that said, do you expect there to be any impact on you budget-wise with that? Do you think it's going to be any impact at all with their being a little bit more aggressive on that situation, or you don't think it's going to be a problem? What do you think?
No, I think at this time, there won't be any impact on our budget.
Okay.
One of the things about our facility is it doesn't meet the level of federal housing. So we can't even house federal inmates
Okay.
in our facility because it's still that far off.
Okay.
Now, when I say that far off, to their standards.
Yeah.
They have a much higher standard than what the states do. I think that we're housing fairly well. It's just, it doesn't meet that federal standard.
Okay.
Now, as far as crime in the area, I mean, and I've said this time and time again, we have I-35 running straight down Clay County. And that is a major thoroughfare for everything that comes from south of the border to go to the northern part of the United States.
Right.
And then every dollar that comes as a result of that coming back through Clay County. So one of the things that we have done since visiting Cochise County, Arizona, is bringing back what we learned from that sheriff's office with Sheriff Daniels, is implementing it within the Clay County Sheriff's Office and basically creating an internal task force with the various units that we've identified that would have a part in criminal interdiction, and we've already started operations. We're working with other organizations that are non-law enforcement, but they have a lot to do with human trafficking, and the results are producing. So I'm not going to say that it doesn't have, that we don't have any issues, but at the same time, we have I-35 going straight through our county, so I know it's there.
Okay.
But I just don't foresee any major situational change as a part of the new administration.
Nothing will impact our budget anyway.
No.
So, okay, perfect.
Not
Thank
that I
you.
see. So the only other thing that I want to say is I certainly don't want to be in front of the people asking for some kind of bond or something like that either, at least not during my tenure as sheriff. But, the projects that we've identified, they're very small on scale. But one of the things, and I had an opportunity to talk with a group of people, is we have to start rethinking the way we look at incarceration. The people that we have in our facility, granted, there are murderers, but they're not serial killers, all of them. They're not serial killers, okay? These are individuals who, at a moment in time, made a decision that ended up with the fatality of someone else. I'm not going to say that they're bad guys. They just committed a really bad crime. They made a really bad decision. But aside from them, the majority of our inmates are good people who made bad decisions. And at some point, they're going to be reintegrated into our community. We're not housing from outside of our county. These are community members within Clay County. And so we have to rethink incarceration. And the thing that really bothered me was when I found out that we had a single mother of 3 who was working 2 jobs to help make ends meet, was in my facility for 7 days because she failed to appear on a warrant for driving on a suspended driver's license. That's BS. She is not a threat to our society, but yet she spent 7 days in my facility. I don't want her in my facility. The people that belong in our facility are threats to society. And so what we're doing is we're working with the prosecutor's office and the judges to identify people who don't need to be in our facility, but still need to be held accountable for their actions. But we're looking at other methods of having them being held accountable for their actions. And electronic monitoring is one example. And rather than go through this vicious cycle of always cycling people through our jail only to be released on electronic monitoring, we're going to try to catch them at the door. And, so that's one example. Another example is working with the Department of Mental Health. And I will say, I'm super proud of this. We are the first of 5 counties in this pilot program that got this program underway. And it has already been successful. And the success is measured by this. We have had 7 inmates that were waiting for a bed at Fulton, at the Department of Mental Health, to get re-engaged medically and everything else they had to so they can come back and be held, be able to be fit for trial. Well, the problem with that is they would wait a year, sometimes 18 months. They would get medically engaged, they're ready to stand trial, they come back to my facility, and the judge can't see them for another 3 months. And then that's the point when they start refusing to take their drugs again, and then we're right back to square one. And it's just this vicious cycle. So now we have Department of Mental Health involved. We have employees, so the subcontractor would be Beacon Mental Health. They hired clinicians, master's level clinicians with a tremendous amount of experience to come in and assess them in our facility and claim them fit for trial, depending on what regimen that they have to take with their medication. And we've already been able to move 2 people out. We just started 3 weeks ago. This is huge. So that's another program that we're working on. So now we don't have to worry about, people who are just in such a bad headspace, seriously mentally ill, and waiting for 2 years before they're finally before a judge to be held accountable for their actions. Right. We can make it happen much more streamlined. So we're trying to think outside the box and be a little more creative. But some of the concern that has been expressed is we're going to be easier on crime. Well, no, again, these are good people who have made bad decisions, and we're still going to hold them accountable, but they just don't have to be behind bars. People who are threats to society need to be behind bars. So that's one of the things that we're doing. And the hope is to reduce our inmate population to a point where we can manage the inmate population that we have, the ones that are serious threats to our society, and then have them move on to DOC or whatever happens after the case. So I'd much rather do that than go before the people and ask for a tremendous amount of money to make things happen, because that's just not palatable for anyone.
Well, and I want to recognize the point that you made, Sheriff, which is generally corrections has changed from the time this facility was built 40 years ago. And so, just speaking for myself, my objective is to make sure that we have the ability to help those people who do need to be helped, to keep those who are dangerous to our community in a facility, and to be able to operate it and manage it in such a way that is sustainable over time. And if that can happen, and I look forward to what comes from the studies that are going to be performed, if that can happen within the facility we already have, awesome, that's great. But if not, I'm not afraid to go ask, for what is needed. And I think if, in either scenario, if we know what we're talking about, we have the data to prove that we know what we're talking about, and the performance to show that what we say actually works, then I'm all for it, wherever that leads us. But I just want to make sure that when it comes to people feeling safe in this community, whether it's through our prosecution, whether it's through our law enforcement, and also through our correction facilities, people feel safe. And we have done our due diligence to make sure that's the case. So I won't belabor it any further. I appreciate your comments, and I appreciate what you're doing, because that is what we should be doing. So thank you.
I have mixed feelings about a lot of things when it comes to the jail, but another situation that we actually had, this is real life example, is we had somebody in our facility who was incarcerated for not paying child support. And then they committed suicide. They died by suicide in our facility. That should never happen. The state of Missouri is tough on back child support, whereas other states across the country are just like, that's modern day debtor's prison. And that's not a fight I'm willing to have. I'll just keep in my lane. But at the same time, we had someone die by suicide because they were in our facility for child support. And that's a really hard pill to swallow. And when their family starts bombarding me with, why did you let this happen? How could you let this happen? It's like, I don't want anyone to die in my facility, let alone because you're in here for child support. It's really hard to navigate. And so, again, I want people who are a threat to society in our facility, not people who there are other means to hold them accountable.
So I too appreciate those comments and how you're trying to look at this. And I think one of the biggest issues with law enforcement since the history of law enforcement is this, and that is that law enforcement is trained and is very good at putting people who break the law in jail. And it's pretty black and white. You break the law, we're going to catch you and throw you in jail. The problem is the majority of people in jail are people with either mental illness or some kind of drug addiction. Oftentimes those go hand in hand. And officers really aren't trained to address that, the way it should be addressed. And that's part of the problem. That's always been a problem with the system, I think, forever, is we put a lot of people with mental illness in jail, which doesn't fix the mental illness. Put a lot of people who have made stupid decisions while they're under the influence of either alcohol or drugs, which normally wouldn't be a decision they'd make if they weren't, but they're addicted to alcohol and drugs, and we're not addressing that for the most part like we should. And the question is that law enforcement's responsibility, and if it's not, whose is it? And it's always been a little bit of a problem. I know Beacon is really doing the best they can, and but that's the hard. And I've dealt with this myself, not only in my career, but also with own family members that have those issues, and it's hard. It's hard to do that. And I know you mentioned the lady who had a bench warrant who was in jail, and from what I understand, talking with the county prosecutor, I think this year that they got rid of the law changed where they're no longer issuing bench warrants for traffic citations, failures to appear.
That's correct.
If I'm not mistaken. I don't know if I agree 100% on that. There has to be some kind of, I don't know if there's any kind of penalty or something involved there, but just to be, I hope that people can't just ignore traffic tickets and nothing happens. I don't know if it shows up later on when they try to renew their registration or whatever, but nonetheless, there are people, the situation you gave, hey, missed a traffic court date, and now they got a bench warrant, and now she's going to jail for a week. We got to, sometimes we get caught up in processes over mission, and we got to think, what's our mission? We want to maybe some rehabilitation. Certainly there needs to be some punishment involved for some people, but let's fix the root of the problem. Kind of like modern day medicine. It's like we want to address the symptoms and not fix the root of the problem. It's like, let's fix the root of the problem. Mental illness is a big problem. Drug addiction is a big problem. Like I said, those often go hand in hand, and if we could somehow figure out a way to address that, and that would help tremendously. That would help monetarily. I mean, because you guys have spent a lot of money on people that probably shouldn't be in there. There could be a better way to help those people, and what that solution is, I don't know. And I've been working on it for 40 years myself, but I'm glad to hear that that's something you're looking at seriously, and that maybe we can be the leaders in finding some solutions there.
I think we are. I think the timing is right for us. In fact, we actually ran the numbers, and 51% of my inmate population is on some type of psychotropic drug or behavioral therapy. We are not a mental institution. And I know the country doesn't have a palate for that, and that's the reason why since the 60s we've been closing those facilities down. But there was a judge that actually said, a Clay County judge that said, I'm ready to let people go now because we're violating their constitutional rights. They're not able to stand before trial to be held accountable because we can't give them the mental the mental health treatment for them to be able to stand fit for or be fit for trial. They don't meet the level of being the term escapes me. Moving on, where they can never be held fit for trial. Okay, most of them can be. They just need to get medically engaged. And when the judge said that, I was just like, oh my gosh, I never thought of it like that, And we're not talking about petty theft. We're not talking about shoplifting. We're talking about armed robbery, But the underlying issue was the mental health aspect of it that wasn't being treated, and that's why they committed the crime they did. And now we have a judge that's saying, I'm ready to let people go because we're violating their constitutional rights. If the sheriff doesn't have the resources and the state doesn't have the resources, then what are we going to do? Leave them locked up forever? And when I look at my daily logs for length of stay in our facility, the ones that have committed homicide, that's understandable, 1,000 days or more, because the criminal justice process has to play out. But when we have inmates that are in there for 200 days, and because they're on some type of medical treatment that hasn't been engaged yet, because we're waiting for something, why do we have them there? They still have to be held accountable, but man, that's why I'm super proud of this program with the state and the Department of Mental Health and working with Beacon, because now we're able to get them through the system a lot faster, and then they can move on, whether that's time spent in jail or yes, you're going to go to DOC. And so, I just think that at some point, something has to happen. But, I can go to Jeff City and I can walk the halls and I can say, hey, former state representative John Carpenter, I need you to do this or support that. And then, he says, we're going to do this. only for it to never make the floor, or it gets not discussed, or whatever the case may be. I think that a lot of the issues that we're facing in our communities, as far as the sheriffs go and the jail facilities, has to be addressed at the state level. Yeah, so I know we've talked a lot about the jail, and we can keep talking about the jail, but we're going to do our best to continue to do what we can, thinking outside the box to make sure that we're running it correctly. But I appreciate your time. Somebody else?
Yeah, no, I just want to say I appreciate your presentation today, and over the years, I know you've always wanted to be innovative, stay on top of, best practices in law enforcement, and then, test out putting them into practice. And, you talked about some of those initiatives earlier. So I want to express my gratitude to you for that. The easiest thing to do is just, maintain status quo and not make changes. I know you've pursued a lot of education over the years too, to sort of help generate ideas and put them into practice. So to the extent that we can do that with the jail and what you're talking about, I think fantastic, not only from a perspective of let's keep people in society and able to reenter and be productive, et cetera, but also from a financial perspective, because that's obviously what we're talking about today. Just during my tenure on the commission, which is just 4 short years, obviously, we talked about earlier, over 50% increase in the budget. That doesn't include, I believe, the CARES Act spending and ARPA spending as well. So obviously, if you were to include those, you're talking well north of 50% increase. So obviously, it's money well spent. Public safety is important. We had, especially coming in, a market problem with paying deputies too little. And so, backfilling that has been expensive and has led to big increases. But, we have a lot of expenses. We've all got to do what we can to keep expenses down, and the jail is hopefully a good place to put that into practice. I've heard a lot of good ideas today. We talked about the scans. I think, the scans are expensive. It's $2,000 to $7,000 a year to do scans. I'd love to have everybody have access to annual scans. It's just, these things cost money, right? And so to actually put them into practice is expensive. With the jail specifically, Commissioner Wagner mentioned trying to have kind of a long-term understanding of what we're doing there. I would love that too. I don't know that it necessarily has to be a completely formal, like let's pay a consultant a bunch of money to do it for us. But if we can do it internally and have a better sense of long-term what we think we're going to need to do with that, I do think that would be helpful. Also, just kind of a ballpark on the cost side. When I first came in, the number that was generally talked about was $100 million. You mentioned today $500 million. Obviously, there's been some inflation between, but maybe not that much. And so, having a little better understanding of exactly what kind of bullet we would be biting would be helpful as well. Also, a good reason to implement the ideas you're talking about with the jail. I assume that what would be pursued is that we would pursue a sales tax in order to pay for a new jail. That's certainly always been the discussion over the years. As you all know, I think we have sales taxes that are too high. So if we can avoid having to pursue adding yet another sales tax on top of our taxpayers, I think that would be a good thing. So yeah, those are my thoughts, and just really grateful to you for being innovative and staying on top of stuff and best practices and all that.
I appreciate that. Thank you. Okay.
Any other questions for the sheriff? All right, thank you very much for being here. May I suggest, Commissioner Johnson, possibly a short break for everyone before we go into the next fund, the park fund?
Take a little break. And by the way, Commissioner Nolte had to take a Zoom call meeting in his office. He'll be back sometime. But I suggest a break.
May I suggest 10 minutes for the public that might be watching us? We'll be back in 10 minutes.
Perfect.
Great. Thank you.
here. Her purse is here, so I know she is.
Yeah, it was weird.
They'll figure it out. They'll hear us back there.
Okay. Thank you very much. We're going to go into the second topic of tonight, or this morning's work session. So I'm not used to what time of day we're at. And so this morning, we're going to go into the Park Fund. So this is the countywide organizational chart. Just kind of as a refresher for the public, on the far right, you'll see our 4 office holders. On the far left is the courts, and in the middle is general operations of the county underneath the county commission. And so those areas, those boxes highlighted in green, represent the park fund. We have 50 full-time employees assigned to our park department, so that's about 9% of the county workforce is in our park fund. So the proposed budget for 2025 for the Park Fund, all in authorized, is $9.1 million. And then you see on this chart, 7.8 is for operating, and reserves are 1.2. You also see here, this is a comparison of adopted budget to adopted budget for 22, 23, and 24. The 25 proposed budget is an 11% increase over the 2024 adopted budget. There's a couple of reasons for that. First of all, as with any of our departments, it's inflationary costs for operations. It's also the personnel package that we've talked about across the county organization. And then there are a couple of other items when it comes to personnel in the Park Fund. Historically, the county has had several employees that were paid for out of the Capital Park Use Tax Fund. And so in the 2025 budget, we're proposing to move 3 of those positions into the Park Fund, because we've created a new division in the Park Fund called Natural Resources. And so we're moving our 3 employees out of the Nature Center that works closely with education, and we felt it was a better fit and should be in the Park Fund and not in the Capital Fund. So that contributed to the increase in the Park Fund. Along with, as we go through some of the requests for the Park Fund, we're also requesting an additional maintenance position within the Park Fund. As we look at revenue sources for the Park Fund, on the left, you will see a pie chart. This is our operating revenue. How much are we bringing in 2025? And so you can see here the largest revenue stream at 72% of the operating revenue is from fees. So this is a fee-supported operated fund primarily. There is 9% of the revenue is a dedicated authorized general sales tax going into the Park Fund. Now, the park also gets a small amount of property tax. That is the surtax on commercial property, and that represents 8%. There is no mill levy. While the county does have a mill levy available to it for the Park Fund, the mill rate is 0. So there is no property tax that is being collected other than the surtax on commercial property. And then there's retail sales. This could be anywhere from the fuel that's out at the marinas that we sell to buying a hat at the lake that says Smithville Lake. So we do get into retail sales, and then 1% is sort of miscellaneous income that we receive. Total sources available to the fund next year is $9.1 million. And so the pie chart will then show you that. The biggest percentage of that comes in reserves that we have, which is 44%. And then we have the fees and taxes, sales tax, the surtax, and then retail sales. As we look at sort of trends within the revenues of our major revenues for the Park Fund, we've provided to you the actuals since 21, 22, and 23, what we're estimating 24 to be, and then what we're proposing to be in 25. So you see the general sales tax that is an authorized dedication directly into the Park Fund has pretty much been the same dollar since 2022. Our property tax, which is that surtax for commercial, we've got a slight deduction in that in 2025. And you'll see also fees based on our estimate and even our actuals in 23. You'll see that 25 proposed is down slightly at 3.6 and retail sales is down slightly. Now, reality is, again, as I said earlier, we put the budget together months ago when we were looking at revenues. And at the time we did it, there was a lot of uncertainty with the economy. There was a lot of uncertainty, and we were seeing a decline in consumer confidence. And when we're talking about the Park Fund, and fees, those are discretionary income. And so when you have consumer confidence kind of taking a decline, they may pull back on discretionary expenditures. And so we took a very conservative approach on what we were thinking might happen with our fee revenue and our retail sales. For our proposed operating expenditures for the park fund next year, it's $7.8 million. Again, the pie chart will show you how are we spending those dollars. And 48% of it is in personnel. It takes a lot of personnel to operate our park system, whether it's helping people at the marina or it's mowing all the parkland that we have. Then we have contractual at 35% and commodities to do what we do in the parks at 17%. And so then the chart will show you, again, what is actual by those particular categories in 21, 22, 23, what we're estimating in 24, and then what we're proposing in 25. And so if you look at the proposed, again, it is an increase. It's similar with all our funds, as we fund every position 100% with all their benefits. This is reflective of the 3 positions we've moved out of the capital fund into the park fund, along with a new position. Contractual is up slightly. Part of that is insurance premiums. Also, we're anticipating utility increases. And it also has leases for our mowers that we have. And we have, I think, leases on 7 mowers that are being proposed we have 30 mowers in the park fund. There's also small trucks and some rollers for replacement, so equipment per our equipment replacement. On the commodities, you'll see that there's an increase. Part of that is for an increase in our buildings and facilities. We're looking at putting on new shingles on the log cabin at Ferris Farm. We have some picnic tables. We're including increasing the merchandise that we buy that then goes around into our retail sales. That can be anywhere from merchandise at the marina to wood that we have available for campsites. And then there is at the golf course being proposed a new application to put on the greens at the golf course. So all those are reflective of increases within the operating expenditure. The park fund has a lot of division budgets, and so what we've tried to show here is of the $7.8 million in the park fund, how is it allocated by division? We talked about by category, personnel, commodities. What this chart shows you is 37% of the operating budget is for our operations department. And then our next one is 16% of the budget goes to the golf course. 14% is in benefits and insurance. And then you see all the other different commodities that we have, divisions that we have, including our historical sites, and then, of course, our fee collections, which are those individuals that work to take, campsites. And so all of those expenditures are about 8% of the proposed operating budget. I'm going to pause if there are any questions on any of the expenditures. Okay. In addition to the park fund itself to operate our parks, we have a park capital use fund, which is funded by our use tax. And so what you see here on this chart gives you, again, adopted budget for the park capital fund for 22, 23, 24, and then proposed for 2025. And you'll see there's a 7% increase from 25 to 24. Our operating expenditures are going up, and our reserves are slightly at a reduction. Now, the funding for the Park Capital Use Tax Fund is basically the operating budget of $3.2 million. And the sources of revenue for that, you can see, is use tax. So 67% of the revenue going into the Park Capital Use Tax, which primarily is all of it except for reserves, comes from our use tax. And that is 16% of the total use tax that is coming into the county. 16% of it is going into the capital for parks. There is an amount that will go into the general capital. There's a part that goes into the road and bridge capital. And as you know, this year we're also recommending part of the use tax go into the general fund, which we talked about last week. So the major revenue sources for this particular fund is 67% from the use tax. There's a small amount of interest earned on our money and our reserves in the park capital fund, and then we have 32% of those funds are currently sitting in reserves. And so the operating expenditures coming out of the park capital use tax, you'll see is 49% of it is capital, whether it's projects or equipment. 40% of it is contractual. A small amount is commodities, and then you'll see we still have personnel costs in the park capital fund. And that is our team, that is our trail maintenance team. And so because they're working on our assets and our capital on our trails and on construction, we have left them in the park capital use sales tax. When we combine the park fund and the capital use sales tax, you'll see that the budget for parks is $12.7, almost $12.8 million. And so the chart on the left shows you how does that break down. So 71% of the funding for the parks comes from the park fund, and 29% of it is reflective, and that comes out of the capital use sales tax fund. And how are we spending that $12.7 million? Well, you can see again, 32% of it is on personnel, and 32% is in contractual. Then we go into capital and our commodities, and then we're proposing 13% would sit into our reserves. And with that, I'm going to turn it over to John Davis, who's going to talk about the accomplishments this year, goals for next year, and answer any questions you may have in details about the proposed budget. Yes? Sure, absolutely.
But what I'm not seeing, and maybe it's here and I'm just not looking right, if you look at what we get from everything, and I know there's a lot of money coming in out there, you know, especially during the summertime. What exactly is it? I make 12 million, I spend 7 million, or the other way around, which, you know what is there a clear profit, or are we kind of, and I don't mean it to sound like this, but are we kind of operating in the hole, I guess?
Can I get you to hold that until
okay.
No, it's fine. After John is done, then the next, I'll take over the next segment, which is
great,
talking
okay.
about, you know, how do revenues and expenditures come into play?
Okay.
What does the forecast look like for the park fund going
Great.
forward? So
Okay,
we do
thank
have that
you.
for you in a
Okay.
format to look at.
Were you getting it? Yeah, did you see it? Oh, okay.
All right, John Davis, Interim Parks Director. Say the least, 2024 has been a busy year with finishing up several ARPA projects and a tornado going through and a very busy season. With our economic opportunities, we've had some pretty good, our accomplishments. We're trying to revitalize our marina bait shops. Camp Branch Marina has traditionally been a fishing area, so we're trying to revitalize it to more fishermen needs. And Paradise Point has been more of our boaters group, so we're planning on revamping and not as much fishing needs over there and utilizing it for recreational boaters. So that means we'll be offering other items for sale at those shops, you know, touristy items, towels, t-shirts, all that, food and drinks. We've also negotiated with Coors this year, ag leases. We're going to, by 2027, we'll take over 522 acres that's been in the Corps of Engineers. They've had control over those leases. We'll take them over and be utilizing those funds over at Smithville Lake. Next year, we anticipate about 161 of the acres. It'll be a step program will come into our control. Estimates for that one is about 11,000 some odd dollars in income from the ag lease if we're basing it on what the Corps has received from their contracts. Safety and well-being accomplishments. We've installed solar lights on handrails of Camp Branch Marina, about 16 of them. Had some people complain it gets dark over on that side of the lake, and that was a quick and easy fix for us. We don't have to run wire and all that. We're also installing 10. We have them purchased. We haven't installed them because we don't want souvenirs taken over the winter, but in season we'll have throwable life rings installed on all the docks with rope, so if anybody falls in, they're accessible. We've also regained the use of a former park ranger boat that'll be utilized by our marina division for towing in all of, if we had to go out and tow in one of our rental boats or any of our dock needs, inspections and all that. Infrastructure, we did complete the Crows Creek Lagoon project. That was an ARPA project. We've installed all of the CXT restrooms, which was 2 very large shower houses and 4 vaults toilets at Rocky Hollow Park, one flush restroom at Trist Falls, and 1 flush restroom at Crows Creek B-Loop Campground. That wipes out all of the old wooden restrooms, which were the original infrastructure with the lake. They're a lot easier to clean, and they also are storm rated, but that project is complete. We've finished phase 1 of the golf course bunker project. We have about 30% of the sand bunkers repaired. Phase 2 will go into next year. It is a 3-phased project. We also are getting the water line relocation project. As you know, we have 2 water lines that go under the lake that supply Crows Creek Campground, Camp Branch Campground. When this project is over, we won't have those, and it'll be all underground, easier accessible than hiring divers and all that to repair them when they are leaking. And those lines were all the original infrastructure. Any questions on 24? All right.
John, just one question.
Yes, sir.
On the phase 1 of the golf course project, you said there's 2 more phases?
Yes.
And any sense off the top of your head what the total cost across the future phases might be?
Estimated we contracted at 1.2, and it's probably going to come in right at that.
Okay.
We're looking at some ways if we can do some other variations in-house. Because the contractor is tied up. So if we can do some of the smaller ones in-house and cut a little bit of cost, we're looking into that. But for the most part, it's probably going to come in right at that.
Gotcha. And that's the total for all 3?
Yep.
In next year, in the 2025 proposed budget, in the capital, there's about $400,000 to do phase 2, and we anticipate phase 3 would be about the same amount. So I think the total project is probably around 1.2 million.
Mm-hmm.
Over the 3
And phase
years.
3 would come the following year, 26?
Yeah, there would be another one in 2026. We're scheduled to talk about the 5-year plan, and so it is noted in the 5-year, in 2026 to finish that project.
Very good.
So, yeah, it's programmed in.
All right. 2024, or Parks goals for 2025, under the economic opportunity, our master plan is roughly 21 years old. There's things in it that have been accomplished. There's some things that have been abandoned, and then some of it we really don't know what happened with it. There was a portion in there that was never approved by the commission because at the recommendation of the park board 21 years ago for green use area fees and all that. We just need to update it. It aligns with some of the, I believe in your strategy, your strategic planning. There was development request for Smithville Lake. This plan will help and get those going. We're also planning on consolidating all of our point of sale systems, and really we're kind of obligated to right now, because especially the James Farm has been and the James Bank have been on a different point of sale system for visitor, day pass sales with them and all their for sale items, books and touristy stuff. But the current credit card system that they're using is going to be out of compliance with safety or regulations, internet regulations, so we have to upgrade. So it's the time that we're going to consolidate all the point-of-sale systems for parks, fee collections, that's campgrounds, fee collections, the historic sites, and the marinas will all be under one point-of-sale system. It'll also save us a little bit of money on credit card usage fees at the marinas because they're on another, we have 3 different point-of-sale systems, and their credit card system fee is about 3.6% for each transaction, so we're getting it back down to 3, which is what the rest of us are. And then we're also exploring advertising, sponsorship. We'd like to, with our, we have the Rocky Hollow ball fields, we have the dog park, any other sponsorship ideas we're looking for. Just bring in a little bit of income, like the ball fields, if they, pay for a banner, that helps for a little bit of maintenance on those ball fields. Under section of employer of choice, we are looking to add another maintenance position at Eastern Parks. And why, are you going to ask? As currently there are 3 there, but when this year Eastern Park staff have taken over the ground maintenance of the airport. It's kind of turned into a little bit more than we anticipated, so we're asking for 1 more person. They added about 40 acres of mowing and weed eating on that campus. It takes them about 3 days to get that done, and then it'll run into taking them 2 days to get the rest of the Eastern Parks done. So that's Jesse James Farm, Claybrook Park, Mount Gilead, Rocky Hollow, Trist Falls. So it ties up pretty much the week with mowing during season. So then that takes away from other maintenance issues, leaks and cleaning showers and whatever else we need to do. Infrastructure goals, again, we're planning to do phase 2 of the bunker restoration project. Can pretty much get on a rotation program of repairing our parking lots, keeping them crack filled and sealed. This year will be Sailboat Cove and W Highway. They're estimated about $150,000 a piece for those. We also have some ADA issues that we're going to start addressing with the marinas. With the Corps of Engineers keeps the lake at a lower level during the winter due to winter drawdown. Our docks, ramps that were originally in place are too steep for wheelchair access. So the only other way to be in ADA compliance is we're going to have to put in an alternate route for those wheelchair accessibility at all 3. So that's Camp Branch, Paradise Point, and Sailboat Cove. 2025, we're going to start with Camp Branch and get that one in compliance. And if it turns out that it's doesn't cost as much as we think, then we'll move on to Paradise Point. But we're planning on a 3-year phased project for that. And then last but not least, for infrastructure, right before lunch, we'll talk about sewage removal. Currently we have about 30 vault toilets, which is a fancy name for Johnny on the spot, portable toilets. We have 3 holding septic tanks for several buildings, and we have 7 lift stations throughout the parks, which are a huge pump system. If you don't know what they are, they're all the sewer lines come into that from various shower houses and other and restrooms and buildings and maintenance shops, and they pump it off to either a lagoon or into the sewer system of Smithville. This year we've spent about $17,000 on having those vault toilets and all that pumped out. It's routine maintenance, and it wasn't my request, it's this staff's request. We're requesting to buy a 500-gallon vacuum trailer for about $30,000 and do it ourselves, rather than be dependent on the outside vendors to do it, because there's scheduling issues with them, and also we can do it more frequently. And staff has to be there anyway because all the vaults are locked, and plus the truck doesn't pump out trash that's dumped in there, so we have to go in there and remove it. So our figure we'd save some money, and also we've got to be there anyways, so. And that's what I have for our 2025 goals. Any questions?
I think at this time, I'd ask maybe John to give an update on where we are with the KCTA project. As you all know, that was destroyed, the building during the tornado, and I know we've been working with the organization and with the architect. We don't have final design, I'm taking his story, but we will be showing the information to you, but I thought you might be interested on where we are with the status of that project.
All right. So far, the old building has been demolished. They did save the fireplace, but after consideration, it's going to come down because it's going to be too difficult to connect a new building into it. And we can look at a system that's a lot cheaper, so maybe a gas insert and all that. The architect has drafted some plans, they're waiting on some input from an engineer to see if, make sure that with the I-beam that is going to hold the structure up. They're looking at what you call, for siding wise, it's called hardy board siding. You can either do vertical or horizontal siding, but it's a concrete fiber board that's dyed the color of, so we don't have to paint it. It'll be a little bit more maintenance free. Looking at probably electrical heating system for the entire building. Done some revamps with consideration, KCTA's input on it for where the layout of the building. They're gonna have a little small kitchenette. There will be no apartment downstairs like there was. There'll be a meeting room and all that, and somewhat of a smaller building because we're not going to add on, or there was an addition on the original building, and so it'll be pretty much a square building, and we are all satisfied so far with what plans we got, but hopefully they're having the framing carpenter look at it, plans this week or first and next, and we're going to start moving forward.
Any questions on that project? And once we have final design of the floor plan and, maybe some architectural designs, I'll send those out to the commission. But certainly want to commend John and the architects working with KCTA and appreciate the KCTA coming to the table and working with us on really the layout of that particular facility. So we'll keep you posted. So the next, I'd like to talk a little bit about the park fund as a whole, and then in the forecasting of that, and also the capital fund. So again, this kind of document you see, and you'll see it by every fund, and so I'm just going to kind of walk you through it, and this will hopefully answer Commissioner Lawson's questions about, are we bringing in enough money, or is it to cover operations? And I would say no. I'd say a large portion of it certainly comes from our fees, right? Whether it's coming from the golf course or the marina or people entering the parks. But, it is costly to mow all those acres that we're talking about and maintain the facilities. So that being said, we're estimating that the beginning fund balance is $4 million. You'll see the operating revenues, which is, again, a dedicated sales tax, general sales tax going in, of $445. Then we have the surtax, the property tax at $410. The fees, which is, again, the majority, so I would say this is heavily supported by its fees, and our retail sales and a little bit of miscellaneous income. So operating revenues are $5.1 million. What's in the 2025 budget for personnel, contractual, and commodities is 7.8. Again, that is all in, as you've seen with all our other funds, and so that is a deficit of $2.7 million. Taking that away from fund balance, if we spent every dollar that's budgeted, which we do not do historically, if we did that, that would leave an ending fund balance of $1.2 million. That is 24% of our operating revenues. That's 24% of the $5.1 million. The finance policy, fund balance policy that the commission approved for this particular type of fund, your minimum is 10% of revenues and your target is 15%. So even if we were to use all of those fund balance if we spent every dollar, it's still 24%, which would exceed the fund balance policy that the commission approved. That being said, again, operating revenues, 5.1 million, but operating expenditures, typically what we have spent over the last 3 years is about 70% of the budget. So if we look at our trend analysis, our expenditures are really closer to 5.5. So Commissioner Lawson, to your point, our targeted budgeted operating revenues versus our trend on expenditures, we're almost balanced. It's about $400,000 negative, and again, could go either way, right, on that. So if that were to be the case, and we use 400,000 of reserves, that would leave us with an estimated fund balance of 3.5 million, which is 70% of our revenues. Now, we have some major projects, for the Parks Department, and we use the capital fund, but certainly as we build up a fund balance in parks, it could also be an opportunity to tap into that resource for some other projects. So happy to answer any questions about these numbers.
I got
Commissioner
one.
Wagner.
So just to follow along the spirit of my colleague's question, I would argue that there are certain aspects of the park fund where an expectation of cost recovery is not going to be there. But there are some aspects of it that have that. Marina operations, golf facility operations, and then I would say those would probably be my top two. And in our historic sites, I will just, the nature of that beast is we are going to subsidize those sorts of operations, and we understand that. But particular to marina and golf, I don't know what our current cost recovery is on those, and maybe you can tell us.
Sure, I don't have the actual numbers there in front of it. We can certainly do that. We have that because we've broken golf courses as a division and their revenues are. So we can provide that, and I'll get that to you at the next meeting. I will say this, the golf revenues coming in exceed, I believe, our golf expenditures, right?
I would
because
believe
that
that.
helps us
Yeah.
in other avenues of the parks that we don't generate money
Right.
from. I would also say the marina is probably the same, especially if you don't take into consideration the pontoon boats and boats that we buy out of capital. But if you're just talking about operating costs of the
Right.
marina and sort of throw in the retail sales. You mentioned the historical sites, you're absolutely correct. They do not generate enough revenue for their operating costs or certainly their capital. I would also say even our maintenance, right? Mowing all those acres in the park certainly costs us more than what we get at coming in at the fee booths for people coming into the parks. So there are different aspects of it, but we can break that out by division, service, and associate their dedicated revenue to that to kind of give you a vision of what that looks like.
That would be great, because
Yep.
in my mind, because this body gets into some of those fee structures, that to me is the best place to understand that cost recovery model. And so, I bring that up because I don't know if that 414 can get to zero or closer to zero.
Yeah.
But if it can, that seems to me to be the most likely place that it can. But I'd love to have that further information.
And I would also say, philosophically, updating the park master plan, right? And so that is a component of it, right? What does it cost to operate the parks? What should the fees be? What is the commission's goal about cost recovery?
Right.
You may want to set and say, well, we want the golf course revenues coming in versus expenditures that we have to maintain it. We want it to be whatever percentage to help offset this, or marina. And so those are things that should come before the commission in updating the park master plan, besides the vision of, where else do you want to go? Trails are something that, really we don't generate revenue on around there, but we have to maintain them.
Right.
And again, we have our trail crew out of the capital fund, and typically materials and supplies to maintain those trails, but if we're going to build more trails,
Right.
how is that going to happen? And so to me, that is part of updating the master plan.
No.
And I think the auditor is going to give us more detail than I have.
Sorry.
Well, I was just going to chime in, yeah, that, we did a profit and loss parks audit, through the end of 2023, based on that question. And I think, the thought about generally, we're subsidizing historic sites is an accurate one. Whereas the other cost centers and activities are profitable, actually, when you look at it from a department basis. We've had the discussion about, are those cost centers capturing all their costs being charged there? That's one thing to look at. I think it's interesting. I reported last year that 2023 was the first year where the Fund 240 actually had more revenues and expenditures, even apart from the general sales tax allocation. So, that fixed general sales tax allocation. I do have, you can always reference the monthly auditor report. I think that's going to be on your agenda tomorrow evening. It talks about through the first 11 months of the year, the Fund 240 Park Fund has a surplus of about $307,000. If you were to include the general sales tax allocation, though, I would say we're closer to break even or a loss. And then it's also worth noting when you look at the entire use tax trails fund, as the administrator mentioned, is just pure subsidy. So, right, so I mean, there's really no revenue generated from that use tax fund besides taxes. So.
Well, I'll just put a little cherry on the top of it because I know my colleague wants to say something. I mean, clearly these things are public goods, and therefore you expect the tax to pay for them so that everyone can enjoy them. I don't think anyone will ever say we need to shut down the Jesse James Farm. So it's just understanding what is appropriate to be subsidized and what is appropriate, and to your point, Administrator, what is the appropriate cost recovery that we should expect?
Right.
And then if some operations subsidize others, then okay, but we understand that. So anyway, I think that's great. I appreciate that and the answers, and also from the auditor as well. Thank you.
And I'd like to tailgate a little bit on what the auditor said. And so I think we started it in 2025 when we created all the divisions. Because again, to your point about cost recovery and what are we subsidizing, what is the true picture to operate Jesse James Farm or Mount Gilead? And so you saw us, we started allocating utilities to each one of those operations. Again, trying to say, what does it truly cost us to operate this particular location, facility, program, whatever that is. And so we did that in 2025. I think we had to do, or 2023 or 4. We've kind of we're continuing to do some true up because it was a best guess, because it was just one utility bill and it got paid under just parks. And so we really didn't allocate it to all the different buildings. And so we're continuing to try to get a better reality picture on each one of those divisions, as we want to call it. And I think then that helps us a lot. So we're getting better at that. And kudos to staff for trying to break that out and figure it out. So.
Well, the other thing is too, as you think about it, how many towns do you see? Kearney, I'll give as a great example. The big thing that they tout when they talk about Kearney and all of its wonderful issues that they have is the trails. Oh, this is a big deal, trail, everybody can, down in the city, they've got trails, or they want a trail that you follow the railroad across the state, whatever it might be. There's zero money probably coming from those, you know what I mean? Nobody pays a fee to walk on the trail. So, with the maintenance of our trails, it can be the same way. I know if you go up there and ride, like you ride on the equestrian trails, you just pull in there and park. You're not going through a gate to pay, so you've got all that to maintain. If you think about it, it's just quality of life. Where I'd like us to be able to see some profit is like the golf course or the marina, and camping. We ought to really be able. In the weekend, if you drive by, there's people lined up all the way out on the road. You can't get up the road because of it. So I know that there's a lot of camping, but then again, you've got new restrooms, you've got all of that maintenance to take care of as well. So it's probably a service, you know, to the community and.
Well, and we certainly do have fees, obviously, for camping, and the staff has implemented some new programs where individuals can register online and pay online for their campsites, besides or do a QRC code as they come to the booth. So we're trying to make it as user-friendly as we can for those that want to come out and do it. We have applied for some grants to expand our trails. Our long-term vision would be able to get on the trail from Smithville Lake and go all the way over to Watkins Mills. Now, that's a pretty expensive trail system, but we pursued Mark for some grants. We ranked, but not high enough to get awarded, but you know, you keep trying year after year and then, you know, you move up, right? So we're continuing to look at how do we expand those amenities and how do we leverage our local dollars with other dollars to make that happen in those kind of situations.
Thank you, Ned. If I could just add, if we are going to do a kind of a deeper dive into the operating costs and whether or not these are paying for themselves, that kind of thing. What I would like to request, and I know some of you have heard me discuss this before, but taking into account any kind of expenditures that don't fall into like sort of the typical operating revenue and expenditure bucket. You know, I know with the golf course, and I've talked about this before, so I apologize if you've heard me say it before, but you know, every so often, what the county does is typically borrows money and then invests huge sums of money into the golf course. I know that happened in the early 2000s, and then it did again in the late teens, you know, as part of the borrowing package. And I believe just between those two alone, it's an 8-figure number. And I don't know that shows up in the calculation of profitability. And so if we are going to, you know, sort of do a deeper dive into that, I'd love to, you know, incorporate those investments as well as, you know, some of the sort of opportunity cost, interest cost of having used the borrowed money in that way.
That is correct. So the debt service payment for the county's portion of the improvements that were done at the golf course in which bonds were issued comes out of the capital use tax fund, is where we pay that debt service payment on an annual basis. So, I mean, we can look at it from a perspective of budget to budget, but if, you know, if we're talking, and I'd be happy to get that for you in this budget process, but if we want to take a more comprehensive look about historically what we've invested and what that looks like, that might take us just a little bit longer to do that.
Yeah, understood.
Yeah.
And I don't know how deep we're going to go into the subject of operating costs and all that, and whether these things are profitable. But I do feel pretty strongly that those need to be included in there. Because I mean, if we were a private sector golf course, we would not just have our annual operating costs and expenditures, but if we did multi-million-dollar, capital outlays every decade, we would have to. That would impact our profitability, certainly.
Absolutely. Yeah.
Yeah, and I guess just along those lines, I'm a bit of a golf course skeptic. Love that we have a great amenity. Love that it's been so well maintained. My view is a little bit old-fashioned. I tend to think that the government ought to avoid getting involved in services that the private sector can otherwise provide. When we talk about the historical sites, when we talk about the trails, when we talk about traditional parks, when we talk about roads and bridges, these are all things that the private sector will not do on its own. The government will be the only entity to do it, or it won't happen at all. Golf courses, obviously, there are many private golf courses. Golf courses will exist whether the government decides to do it or not. So the point being, when we want to understand how much money we are or are not spending on the golf course, I think having the most fulsome picture of the amount of money we're putting in versus the amount of money that's coming out, and whether long-term we want the government to keep providing that service or not, I think is a good conversation to have over time.
And I would just add, Commissioner, as well, in the audit, I took your comments on that subject and included some of that information, and certainly we can revisit it as well. Just some quick statistics we can mention to that effect. The 2018 certificates of participation that have since been refunded I noted in the audit that there were 60 different projects for park-related expenditures of about $10.6 million. The golf course had 8 of those projects at $3.5 million. So that would be added to, the overall loss, essentially, because there's no, revenue associated with that unless you were to look at, did it improve or enhance operating revenues, right, per se. The administrators talked before about American Rescue Plan Act projects, right? So certainly we continue to make new allocations and expenditures on that grant towards park. As was mentioned about debt service, so now that was, kind of retrospective, looking prospective, annually. In 2024, 2025, we spend roughly $1.3 million on debt related to park activities. That will decrease to $1.2 million a year through 2031, and then it ends. So that just gives you some additional information with recent debt anyway, and then paying that off. So I just wanted to add that in.
Looking, forecasting for the park fund. This is just the park fund. Again, you've seen this chart, very similar for the other funds, and so you look at our 2025 proposed, and again, these are all trend analysis, right? So taking trend with expenditures and taking those assumptions, moving it forward, and then revenues are the same assumption. Unfortunately, this one, the expenditures trend line seems to be a little higher than our revenue trend line at this point in time, and fund balance is going down. But again, this is, as we know, we look at the budget every year, and so what does that look like, and how do we address those issues going forward? So this is a snapshot, which has it on our radar screen about how do we look at our fees and what is that fee structure and the cost recovery. So a lot of those things will come into play with regard to that, to kind of change this and get those, the red line and the blue line, closer together. We also want to take a look at the Park Capital Sales Tax Fund. So that is another piece of the pie that is, and again, this all comes from use tax. Again, same format, trying to put together for you what does 2025 proposed budget revenues and expenditures look like, and what does that do to fund balance, or at least projected to do to fund balance. So we believe that the beginning fund balance in the Park Capital Use Tax Fund is $1.2 million. We're proposing that we will see $2.4 million of use tax come into that revenue with some small $35,000 in interest income. So total operating revenue is almost $2.5 million. And then you see the expenditures being proposed, and the budget for the operating expenditures is $3.2. And so that is using $745,000 of reserves, with a projected ending fund balance of $454,577, which is 18% of the operating revenue. And again, I go back to the Commission's fund balance policy, which you have a minimum of 10% and a target of 15%. So if this would come into fruition, the estimated ending fund balance still exceeds your target fund balance in this particular fund. However, historically, trend-wise, what we have seen, and again, a lot of this, especially when you're talking in capital of $1.5 million, and you heard John mention earlier, when we put a budget together on capital projects, the staff does their due diligence to estimate what that capital project is going to be. Many times, which is our goal, is that it comes in under what we have in the budget. But what we've seen in the trend in the park fund is that basically 80% of expenditures has been the reality of what's been budgeted. And so if that becomes true, and we hold our trend, then that far column shows that our operating revenues to our projected trend operating expenditures are almost even. It's a little negative of about $97,000, which would leave 1.1 in fund balance, which is a 44% of our revenues, which exceeds the Commission's policy. And you want, in this type of fund, you want to continue to build that fund balance because it is about capital. So if we would be successful and get grants from Mark to build new trails, you certainly want to then have the funding available for the county's match. So with that, I'd answer any questions about this particular slide and okay. So then we also do a forecast on what the park capital sales tax fund looks like going forward. And you see in this particular fund, because of use tax, and we've talked about this, is growing pretty substantially compared to our sales tax, even though we've been conservative and said 5%. And so you see going forward using trend analysis that our revenues actually are projected to exceed our expenditures, and we continue to add fund balance, which is good, especially if the master plan is done and there are some projects like trails going forward and there needs to be county local match to any grants that we would give, that we're building up that cash fund balance to make that happen.
If you could look at 26, where it's just about even Steven there, you could figure out what the heck we did that year and then do the same thing going forward. Of course, there's probably going to be a bunch of maintenance and things that are going to need to be done again, and that's going to skew it off a little.
Well, and I would say the county was very fortunate with the ARPA funding. And so when you think back of the summary I did of ARPA, parks got a fair substantial of money, which allowed us to deal with deferred items in the parks, whether it was parking lots, also allowed us to replace fee booths and be more efficient with those, to also do the restrooms, get rid of the wooden old, maintenance issues and create new restroom facilities that are also storm shelters. So we had a wonderful opportunity, and I think the commission took advantage of that and placed some investments into the parks to address some things that we've not been able to do in the past. But we need to factor in how we're going to maintain those going forward, right? If there are no other questions on the park fund, then I would like to just kind of remind the commission of the budget schedule. So the next workshop is next Wednesday, the 18th at 9 o'clock here in the chambers. There'll be two funds that will be discussed, the assessor's office budget and then road and bridge. And in addition, depending on the timing of it, we may start into not only Road and Bridges CIP for 2025, which we will do, but if there is time, we may start going into the 5-year CIP. And then we have scheduled the following day on December 19th, the last workshop, which will wrap up the 5-year CIP and any other deliberation that the commission has with regard to the proposed budget. And then we're scheduled for January 9th for a public hearing and budget adoption for 2025. With that, I'd be happy to answer any questions, and I think John would be happy to answer any questions. We will try to do a cost analysis, at least for the 25, what we're proposing, and maybe what we've seen in 24 for those different divisions. Just kind of a more simplistic to give you a sense of where we are, and then kind of maybe update the auditor's report he did a couple of years ago. That would be a more deeper dive on all of the costs and what that looks like.
Could I, on that point, and I appreciate our colleague bringing it up, but one of the challenges I had, quite honestly, with how it was presented before was how those capital expenditures were treated. And as I recall, and you may tell me my memory's faulty, my wife does all the time, how we seem to look at those investments were almost on a cash basis and not amortized as far as the life of those, because I think depending on how you look at that, you get wildly different, a wildly different report, I would say. And so I'm not sure how best to suggest, but it does feel to me like if we are making capital improvements, those are meant to be longer life, longer shelf, which I think plays into whether or not those are profitable or not. So I just want to throw that out, because I tend to remember when it was presented before, it was almost presented as almost like on a cash basis, which would wildly throw off your profit loss and all of that. Am I being fair in that statement, Mr. Auditor, or?
Yeah, I think we did take, what would have been the, going back to total revenues in that time span and the total expenditures all in. Yes, it would be. So you're right. I mean, we could look, try to identify, and we know that information, what were the assets acquired through that debt, if any, and then look at the, sort of, to your point, amortize it, divide the cost over that timeframe. And then we could project what we estimate the revenues to be into the future in the same time and give you a different look like that. But
Yeah.
that'd be a very, very rough estimate.
And I understand that, and that's fine. And the only reason I say that is because as we've talked in this, with this body about other assets, like if we purchase vehicles and things like that, there's a life to those sorts of things, right? So I would assume we could at least roughly estimate if I'm putting in a new bunker, I'm not a golf guy, if I buy a new bunker, what do I expect that life to be, even though I know I'm putting in a capital outlay to get it? So the difference between OpEx and CapEx, I think, is important in that discussion, but anyway.
All right, if no one has any other questions, then I think we're concluded this workshop and actually got done early.
Always a good thing. So if there are no other questions or comments, we are adjourned. Thank you.